Raymond. Good morning, everyone. We'd like to call to order the February meeting of the RTC Executive Advisory Committee. Item number 1 on the agenda is to conduct a comment period for citizens' participation. No action can be taken on any matter discussed under this item, although the EAC can direct that it be placed on a future agenda. Do we have anyone wishing to address the committee under public comment? Seeing none, we'll go to item number 2, is approve the agenda. Any revisions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the staff would like to pull item number 18 off the consent agenda and non-consent for discussion at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any other changes?
Move for approval of the agenda as amended.
We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved as amended. That takes us then to the consent agenda item, which would be for items 3 through 17. They will be considered by the RTC EAC to be routine and acted upon in one motion. Any discussion or motions on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. That takes us to item number 18, is adopt the draft interlocal contract and authorize the chairman to sign.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, at last month's Executive Advisory Committee, we presented this item and went over some of the changes, so I probably won't go over the changes that we discussed last time. Again, most of those changes were in relation to updating the contract to reflect changes in federal legislation, as well as recent policy that's been approved by the RTC board. However, we held the item at last month's meeting to allow additional time for review. We had asked for additional comments, and I did receive some comments. So I wanted to walk you through some of the comments that we did receive. Those are highlighted in the handout that you have, which is a little different than what's included in the backup. So the first set of comments is on page 3, where it's talking about responsibilities of the state. Under 2A, the word and collaboration was added, and then there were 2 sub-bullets added for D and E. Those are, again, this is related to the state. Provide the RTC and the parties current and future plans for streets and highways for maintaining and updating the functionally classified system of streets and highways in accordance with the RTC's planning cycle for developing the Regional Transportation Plan, the TIP, and any amendments. And then E, reading, provide the RTC with transportation planning priorities facing the Nevada Department of Transportation and detailing all transportation planning and transportation-related air quality planning activities regardless of funding sources anticipated within the county and cities during the next 2 fiscal years in accordance with the RTC's Unified Planning Work Program development cycle. These were proposed by City of Henderson. I think it's really, and I don't mean to speak for them, but I think it was really just to increase kind of the coordination between Nevada DOT and kind of the local entities and the MPO and trying to solidify that in this contract. The one thing that I was mentioning to Mr. Chairman before the meeting is we do have another mechanism in place that we can address these. In the Unified Planning Work Program, we have a prospectus. This was a recommendation from Federal Highway Administration a couple years ago to include an agreement in the back of the Unified Planning Work Program that details the roles and responsibilities of the Metropolitan Planning Organization as well as the Nevada Department of Transportation. I don't have any problem with keeping this in this interlocal agreement. The one thing that it may do, though, is it may add a signatory to the agreement, and that's actually one of the comments we'll get to at the very end as well, in that NDOT currently is not a signatory to this contract, and so adding, some language about some of these added responsibilities may infer that they should be a signatory to it. I don't know if you want me to go through all the changes, Mr. Chairman, and then we can kind of circle back and have an additional discussion, or do you want to pause here and discuss these specific ones?
I might just add some of the comments were what I was trying to get at, and I've been trying to get at with NDOT to have them be a more cooperative partner in the transportation planning process. To date, I've yet to receive any responses to any of my requests to be included or to understand some of those, so this was my attempt in trying to, bring them to the table. Certainly, we understand that they report to the State Transportation Board, and that's their ultimate direction, but it was clear to them that we all report to our own city councils and board of county commissioners, respectively, and that we still find a way to get around the table and work through the issues and then go back and work with our electeds as well. And I didn't think it was too much to ask that they try to do the same. The other thing I added is that the local entities are the ones closest to the people. We tend to get more of the complaints and concerns and are more in touch with some of the needs. And so I just felt it was better if they were here to share, so we could share those with NDOT. The language is a little problematic if they aren't signatory to the agreement. I know that creates a whole lot more process in getting that through the state, but even under paragraph 2, responsibilities of the state, if they aren't signatory to it, then they aren't really bound to it. So I'd open that up for discussion, what the committee might think as to their involvement. And certainly open if there's other mechanisms to capturing those intents. But I just feel like we're submitted their plan and asked to approve it as is, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, we can go either way. I don't think we have much of a heartburn of, you know, including it in this document or the other vehicle. So it's really kind of what the discretion of this group is. So maybe you want me to move on to the next ones?
Yeah,
and then
let
we can
everybody
kinda-
think on that for a minute.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay, then on page 4, there's just a little clause that was added under responsibilities of the RTC. The sentence starts off, "The RTC is a public body created under Nevada state law with responsibility for planning, development, and operation of public mass transit or transportation services in Clark County, and for the planning and implementation of certain street and highway improvements through interlocal agreement," added languages, "with the entity or entities having jurisdiction in Clark County." Again, this was an addition by City of Henderson on that one. Should we pause there for any discussion?
Yeah,
Okay.
just maybe one or two things if I could. You know, we have our FAST agreement, which is signed by all the entities, including RTC, including NDOT. And so I would just maybe echo the question from Robert and ask the RTC, is there any reason why NDOT can't be a signatory to this agreement to further strengthen that regional, you know, every element of the transportation system that all of our respective agencies, of course, including NDOT, is so important to our, you know, metropolitan transportation planning. And it just seems like we shouldn't move this forward if we can have NDOT as part of the signatory. And the only other area I was going to mention also was in section D, getting future plans for streets and highway maintenance. One of the bigger challenges we have is with some of the state highway roadways that are through our jurisdictions. We seem to not always know when those roads are going to be rehabbed to kind of plan some of our own projects. And so I would definitely say that that's an element that trying to know when they're going to have those, I think, 3R projects planned really helps us plan some of our flood, sewer, and other elements that we've sort of been not as clear on. So I just wanted to echo, that's a great addition, I think, that section D for sure, to help us with some of those planning aspects.
Yeah, and the only reason why I think in the past, and I'm speculating a little bit because I wasn't here 10 years ago when this was originally developed, but I speculate that the reason why NDOT perhaps wasn't a signatory to this anyway is because the relationship between RTCs and MPO and NDOT is already kind of spelled out through a lot of the federal regulations, and we have, you know, other agreements with them as well. So maybe that's why this was meant to be more, you know, an understanding between the local jurisdictions in terms of what the RTC's role is as an MPO, and that there are other mechanisms in place for that relationship between the RTC and NDOT. The one thing I will note is I haven't had a chance to vet some of these concepts with NDOT, so you know, depending upon the appetite to move forward with these recommendations, I would probably recommend that we give NDOT an opportunity to review them and, you know, see if they are comfortable with that language or if there's any, you know, changes that they would want to make to it as well. So, you know, I suspect coming into this that we may have to hold the item again, but, you know, this at least provides the opportunity for folks to have a discussion and dialogue about it to see which direction we want to move before we approach NDOT on it. So. All right, then on the page 5, towards the bottom, there's just, again, another little clause that was added under 5F, establish and implement the new languages in cooperation with the parties. a performance-based planning and project selection process for the RTP and Transportation Improvement Program as required by federal law or regulation. That's not problematic for us at all. And then a new line was added under H, so there's a new I, which is to monitor and report on adjustments made to local jurisdiction land use and socioeconomic data provided as input for the metropolitan transportation planning process. And again, this was from City of Henderson. I think the idea here was to make sure that we circle back with the jurisdictions on like modeling efforts and some of the inputs that go into those models to make sure that, you all understand how those models are assigning, employment or population to our traffic analysis zones, our TAZs. I believe that was kind of the intent on this one, so. All right. And then that concludes the suggested changes that I received. The last one is just on the bottom of page 9, which we already discussed. Mr. Chairman brought this up, that NDOT should probably be a signatory to this since they are referenced in the opening and they are being committed to certain responsibilities. So we discussed that already as well. Mr. Chairman, I guess at this time, I'd love to get some additional feedback from the committee in terms of which of the suggested changes the committee would like to move forward with. Then I can propose those back to NDOT. We can kind of get their read on it, and then we can make some changes and hopefully bring back a final draft for you or to you at the, what is this month? This is February, so that'd be the March meeting. That'd be my hope.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What is staff's recommendation on the state being signatory to this agreement?
It's not problematic for me, right? But I'm not the state, so I can't really say whether or not they have heartburn on it. I don't know if Mr. Clyde has any concern over it, but it's just, for us, it's just another signatory to it. We just need to go through their process to get them to sign off on it. But we have other agreements with NDOT, so to me, it's not too problematic.
So RTC has other agreements with NDOT that kind of puts this responsibility for the coordination on RTC. So if the state's not going to be a signatory to this, then those responsibilities that we identify in this agreement as the state's responsibilities should be RTC's responsibilities to coordinate with the state to get that information to the local jurisdiction. And the state shouldn't be addressed in the preamble of the agreement.
I'm not legal counsel. I don't know if that's how that would work. I mean, I don't know if we were to put you in agreement that you're not a signatory to, if all of a sudden we're responsible for your work.
The past agreement did that. The past
Correct.
agreement had the state responsibilities in it.
It did. You're right, absolutely
The
right.
state's not agreeing to perform those responsibilities.
Right.
But RTC has separate agreements with the state to ensure
Correct.
that responsibilities are performed.
Correct.
So the onus is on RTC, not the state. So those state responsibilities that you cite here should be RTC's responsibilities to coordinate with the state to bring that information to the local jurisdiction.
Mr. Seabird, if I may. So alternately, would it be appropriate maybe to reference that out to the other agreement?
Yeah, that RTC has that responsibility to coordinate with the local jurisdictions, anything that the state has with the interlocals or the agreements between RTC and the state.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, I don't have a problem with that. That's not problematic for us. But I guess all I'm just trying to say is, we're kind of the proverbial middleman, right? So to the extent possible, we'll get as much information from the state and bring it to you, but, we only have so many tools in our tool belt in that regards as well. So, if
And the alternative would be for the state to be a signatory to this agreement and agree to those responsibilities.
right.
Sounds like we need to meet with the state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll do that. Not a problem.
Is there a preference?
Yeah, is there a preference among this committee that we can,
Well, you sound to me like RTC doesn't want to take on that middleman burden, so the preference would be for the state to be a signatory.
we're always in the middle, stuck in the middle with you, right? Rock, hard place? No. Any other direction from the committee on any of the other proposed language changes? Is there anything else we missed? Okay, so then my understanding, if I understand the direction of the committee correctly, is we'll go ahead and propose these to the state. We'll kind of walk them through it and see what their read is. We'll propose them as a signatory to this as well, and make sure that they're okay with all of that. And if not, we'll come with some suggested changes at the next meeting. Okay.
So the meeting, motion to hold might be in order. Would that be appropriate?
Yeah.
We have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Item number 18 is held. Item number 19, under Metropolitan Planning Organization, is receive a report on the safety performance measure targets.
I guess this is a PowerPoint. I have to come up here and look more official. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Raymond Hess. I'm here to talk to you about safety performance targets. So what I'd like to do is just kind of walk you through a several-step process that we've been engaged with Nevada Department of Transportation on and the other MPOs in the state on for the better part of probably 2 years, ever since these new performance measures were enacted in legislation. Or not. All right, we'll do this a different way. Here, Tammy, I'll just sit over there and
Okay.
use the mouse. It's on. I don't know why it's not.
Then, Mr. Chair, it might be taking a few seconds because it's multi-part.
Oh, it did
There.
go through?
Yeah, I think it did. And then,
All right, this way I can spread out more. Sprawl over. All right, so Federal Highway defines transportation performance management as a strategic approach that uses system information to make investment and policy decisions to achieve national performance goals. Why transportation performance management is important is ultimately the goal is to make better decisions, to allocate resources efficiently, to increase accountability and transparency, and improve communication with decision makers and the public. A lot of the slides I'm going to show you are actually taken from information that was provided to us by Federal Highway Administration for background, and then I'll get into some of the specifics from Nevada Department of Transportation. So there are ultimately 6 elements to transportation performance management. The first is the national goals. So there are 7 national goal areas, and we'll go over those in just a minute. Secondly, Congress defined a set of performance measure areas and even defined some of the specific measures, so that's the second step in the process. Third, state DOTs and metropolitan planning organizations are required to set targets for each of those measures, and we're going to go into those in specific detail related to safety in just a minute. Fourth, measures and targets are required to be incorporated into specific transportation plans. Fifth, there's a reporting element whereby states, MPOs, and USDOT are required to report on transportation performance. And lastly, accountability and transparency. This is meant to include reviewing progress against these targets and provide reports to the USDOT. Ultimately, in terms of responsibilities, when we look at this kind of flow chart, the United States Department of Transportation is responsible for establishing measures, identifying data sources, defining metrics, and reporting to Congress. They have ultimate stewardship and oversight of this process. But the role that the states and the metropolitan planning organizations play are to establish targets and support the national goals in the planning process. So we mentioned those national goals. There are 7 of them. The first is safety, and this speaks to a reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads. The next is infrastructure condition, and this relates to maintaining the highway infrastructure asset system in a state of good repair. The next is congestion reduction, and this is to achieve a significant reduction in congestion on the national highway system. The fourth is system reliability, which is to improve the efficiency of the transportation system. The next one is freight movement and economic vitality, and the idea here is that the freight network provides access to trade markets and ultimately supports regional economic development. The sixth is environmental sustainability, that we can protect and enhance the natural environment while implementing the transportation system. And then lastly, reduction of project delivery delays. And the idea is that we can accelerate completion of projects through elimination of delays, including reducing regulatory burdens and improving agencies' work practices. So related to those measures, there was a performance management rule established in 23 CFR 490 that established 5 major areas of concentration. So those are safety, condition of pavement and bridges, system performance, and congestion mitigation, air quality, and freight movement. The first targets that need to be set are safety, and that's what we're going to discuss today. So under safety, there are actually defined 5 different measures, and those are enumerated above. So number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities, the number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries, and then there was also a focus on non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries as well. So related to how things have been done here in Nevada, the Nevada Department of Transportation submitted their targets in their Highway Safety Improvement Program on August 31st, 2017. And pursuant to some of the federal regulations, you have to look at a 5-year rolling average for each of these different safety measures. So let me show you what those targets are. So for decreasing the upward trend, so here, this is the specific target that ultimately we're proposing to follow along with the state on. So everything is measured against a 5-year rolling average. And so the goal here, the target is decrease the upward trend of the 5-year rolling average so that it's less than what it currently is now, related to number of fatalities, number of serious injuries, number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So this tackles 3 of the 5 that we enumerated before. So you can see ultimately over time that this would eventually get us to 0 fatalities. Just to give you a little bit of a timeline, Chen in our office went ahead and crunched the numbers. If this trend would hold true, the number of fatalities, we would get to 0 fatalities in just under 30 years. That felt about right. Obviously, if we set too aggressive of a target, it would be unobtainable, and then therefore difficult to achieve. If we did anything less than that, it would seem too loosey-goosey, and we're not taking safety seriously. So this felt like it was within the realm of possibility. It was within kind of the time frame of the regional transportation plan and seemed reasonable.
Mr. Hess?
Yes.
If I may?
Mhm.
Just curious as to why we seem to be focused on serious injuries and fatalities and not just accidents. I mean, it seems like you have to get to a certain level to be considered, and maybe we got to lower that threshold.
Right, and so these are all set by the legislation, the federal legislation, and so the specific focus for them was fatalities and serious injuries. I think your point is I think it's well understood. I think you make a good point that if you reduce all crashes, then by de facto you're reducing fatalities and serious crashes as well. I think ultimately what my understanding is that the focus on serious and fatalities were really how can we really make our roads safer in terms of the lives that are lost on our roads every year, and use that as kind of the focal point. It's a little bit easier to track those numbers because almost every state tracks, well, they all do, they track the fatality rate, and sometimes that's a more surefire number than perhaps fender benders that may not go reported. And so yeah, ultimately this was kind of set at the national level, and we're just kind of following the line on that. The next is a fatality rate. So again, kind of positioned a different way, you take the total number and put it against a rate of vehicle miles traveled. So in this target, the fatality rate set it at 1.25. And the idea here is to decrease the upward trend so that the 5-year rolling average between 2011 and 2011-15 per 100 million vehicle miles traveled is less than the projected fatality rate of 1.26. And then the last one is kind of similar as well. This is a serious injury rate. set it at 4.89, so decrease the upward trend so that the rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled is less than the projected serious injury rate of 5.08. And these were the ones, again, that were set by the state. Just want to reiterate that. So in terms of what role we have to play as an MPO, we have to support the national transportation performance measures and these safety targets as well. So we have one of two courses of action we could do. We could either establish our own, or we could adopt the states and kind of move forward with supporting those. And so what we ultimately thought was the best course of action is to support the state's efforts for a number of reasons. We thought this was appropriate. First of all, as I mentioned before, these seemed reasonable, that, based on the data analysis, we felt like this was an obtainable goal. The other thing is it really helps facilitate the data collection and it facilitates the reporting process if we're in lockstep with the state. If we set something different, then it kind of creates a little bit of a disconnect between what the state's targets are, what the MPO's targets are. We rely on the state's data for all of our tracking purposes, and so really kind of disconnecting that really creates a little bit of a hassle to try to make that work. It's not impossible, but it creates some added steps in the process. The other thing I'll note here too is we have the opportunity to reassess these every year. As a matter of fact, that's actually one of our processes. And we thought for this first year it seemed the most sense to just kind of see how things are going by aligning ourselves with what the state's goal is. And then if we want to be more aggressive or if we think we need to reset them at a different rate, we can revisit that next year after we've kind of gone through this first year and trial period to see which way the trends are going. Next, the Transportation Improvement Program shall be designed to promote achievement of the performance targets. To the extent practicable, it has to describe how investments in the statewide Transportation Improvement Program and the Transportation Improvement Program make progress toward achievement of the targets in the plan. One thing to note here in terms of the timeline that Congress set, all plans amended or developed after October 1st, 2018 must reflect a performance-based planning approach. So we have, the better part of 8 months or so to make sure that we fully incorporate this process into the Transportation Improvement Program moving forward. Next is the reporting process. We have to provide annual reports to USDOT. We won't provide them directly. We would provide them to the state, and the state would report those up. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we do have an opportunity to reevaluate these targets on an annual basis. Which brings us back to the accountability and transparency, obviously with the reporting and the information that we're putting up to the state and be reporting back to you in about a year's time. You'll be able to factor that into your decision-making process and provide some additional accountability and transparency to the projects that go into the Transportation Improvement Program. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions from the committee?
Chairman, I've got a few comments I'd like to make. For many years, we used to have an annual crash review meeting with NDOT Safety Division, where they would do a lot of crash data analysis specific to our individual entities, and it would usually be a 2-day session generally. And out of that meeting, NDOT would identify if the local agencies support some off and on system safety improvement projects. And for whatever reason, about 4 or 5 years ago, that process was ended. And I think it was a valuable way for us to identify those hot spots because they have so much staff that focuses on crash safety, crash data statistics. And so I think in terms of having the safety performance targets and this transportation performance management plan, I think it's important that we have a discussion with NDOT safety section to see about trying to restore that program. There's that additional federal hazard mitigation funding source that generally that section uses to do safety improvements statewide. And it just was one of those areas that really aligns itself with everything you just presented. And so I just wanted to bring that up and see if the rest of the committee feels that that's something we need to reestablish. We thought, at least at the City of Las Vegas, it was a very valuable 2-day session for us to address some of those crash safety items. And then the only other thing I was going to mention was, in terms of measures, I believe we have a couple of safety measures in the Southern Nevada Strong program that may not be on NDOT's list. I think we have one that was focused on serious pedestrian injuries and/or fatalities per 1,000 residents, or some metric
Right,
like that.
right.
So I would just suggest that, since Southern Nevada Strong Plan is so important for us, if there's a safety measure on that that's not on NDOT's, we should at least add that one to it.
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, both of them, actually. So we can follow up with NDOT staff about the annual crash review workshop. I would imagine we'd reach out to like Ken Mammon as a starting point and see where we can go from there, or Lori Campbell. And then related to the Southern Nevada Strong, I think you're absolutely right. I know on the indicator dashboard, that's one of the indicators that's identified, and we update that annually as part of the update to the indicator dashboard. So yeah, that could be something we could report on easily. The one thing I'll say though is I just want to kind of nuance a little bit. I don't know if you're recommending this, but what I would probably suggest is it continue to live in the indicator dashboard, and we can report it as part of this process, but that you don't necessarily set it as a target just because it's outside of the realm of what has been established at the federal level. So, but we can gladly, as part of our discussions, bring that to the forefront, when we report on this. Not a problem.
Any other comments?
All right.
This item was just receive a report, so no
Correct.
action is required.
Correct.
That takes us to item number 20, conduct a comment period for citizen participation. Again, no action can be taken on any matter discussed under the item, although the EAC can direct that it be placed on a future agenda. Do we have any public comment?
I had a couple things, if I may, Mr. Chairman, very quickly.
Please, Mr. Pagnon.
Thank you. First, we'd like to invite the Public Works Directors to stay over for a little after party. We'd like to talk to you, show you what we're proposing to do as far as potential changes to how we plan and implement our capital improvement programs with the express goal, and then nice segue, Mr. Hess, I appreciate that, to reduce project delivery delays. Dr. O'Heaney's Directive 007, which is to reduce red tape, increase efficiencies, do everything the RTC can to get out of the way and make sure that the agencies can deliver those projects to the public absolutely as fast as possible. So we think we have some good ideas to move us in that direction. So if you could, we'd love for you to stay over. And secondly, just to bring this to your attention, 3M has something they're calling a 3M Transportation Safety Division Roadshow. It's going to be, some of you have already received an invitation, I believe, from Mr. Eric Dornack. That is going to be out at the FAST Traffic Management Center, March 2nd, open house style from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. This is the demo truck that was put together and went out to the American Traffic Safety Services Association recent conference and expo in Houston. So a lot of cool stuff in this truck, interactive displays, transportation safety, all kinds of good stuff. So you're more than welcome to come out, and that would be it. Oh, and there on the way out, there's some detailed information if you'd like to know the real specifics.
Very good, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other public comment?